ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of What's Happening. I'm George Binns, and I'm here with my co-host, Elliot Margolis. And we're continuing with our series of State of the City with the City Councilors. And this evening we have as our guest the City Councilor from Ward 1, Todd Rotondo. Hey, welcome, Todd. Glad to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me.
And I guess we can get started with the issues of what do you think is the state of the city right now?
When you ask me that question, do you mean financially or do you mean, so financially we're in good shape.
All of the above.
All right, fair enough. So financially, from how I understand it, we're in great shape compared to other communities anyways. We have a healthy stabilization or free cash, which bodes well for us. We know back in 93, we were in an $8.5 million budget deficit, and Scanlon came in and, we downsized through attrition and retirements and what have you, and built a solid foundation. And Mayor Cahill came in and continued and, through a good economy, but they were smart. He has a great finance director who's been smart, and even past councilors who served on the board prior to me. They were smart enough to be able to say, hey, let's put an economic policy also for our budget analyst for the city council to say, hey, we need to put some money aside for a rainy day fund, similar to what the state did. And they have, and they adopted a rule, not that it's set in an ordinance, but a rule that's 10% of the budget to build towards that in the case of a rainy day. And more of an economic downturn, not a pandemic, but it did, it has bode well for us here. Especially right now where we're in uncertainty of what the state budget's going to be. So we're able to use some stabilization funds, not have to do any layoffs, continue with, the services that we have. The mayor did ask departments in the last quarter of last year to tighten the belts tighter than usual. So we've been very fortunate with that aspect. Look at other surrounding communities that are doing layoffs, PBD especially, and Salem's a little bit falling into that issue. We're not a gateway city where we get additional funding from the state, whereas, I speak of Salem and Peabody, they do get that. So financially, we're in good shape. In regards to, we have a lot going on. We have the coastal resiliency, and George, you and I had a one-on-one discussion a few weeks ago about that. And, that position's just been created, which is to really take on global warming issues, mobility, inequities that are happening within the city. I know the mayor's also proposed the director of equity, diversity, and inclusion, and that hasn't been filled yet. I know that's been an ongoing process, and it may have been in response to the civil unrest that's currently going on. And
do we really need that? I mean, have there been problems that we need to create that?
I'm not an expert enough to state. I'm still learning more about this right now. So what I've been doing personally, and the fortunate part that I have is I've been hosting meetings at the restaurant between people from the Human Rights Committee, people of color, some of our police department members in the Community Impact Unit, the school resource officers. And it's been a one-on, real personal conversations going on, 4-hour meetings at night, pizza being given, sodas, what have you. But, you go back and forth and you're kind of hearing people of color, even people not of color, the human rights communities that feel that it's something that we need to kind of focus on. Now, do I know what the right answer is for what that position is supposed to look or what the job? I don't. And that's what I think the mayor is trying to create by having all these answers. Now, I know the school department has created a similar position, but that was done through a grant, and that was actually done and discussed earlier in January from what I understood from the superintendent of schools. So that position was well before any of the civil arrests became more prevalent in our community. And so to speak to that then is if the superintendent recognized that back in January, maybe there is a point to kind of identify. I know some of the conversations are throughout the community from how I understand is that why aren't there people of color or people who look like me that represent, the minority population working in the city hall or working in the school buildings? We don't have a lot of black teachers. We don't have a lot, we have one black police officer. Whether it's we just don't pay a lot in the city, or we're not attracting them. We do have certain rules that we have to follow as a community. We do have civil service, so it's a challenge. And I don't know the right answer correctly right now. So, Ella, to really give you an honest answer, I couldn't, because I'm still learning myself. And one thing getting involved with this conversation earlier on after the whole George Floyd incident was I completely said I'm ignorant. I didn't recognize certain things that were existing. And I'm willing to learn is what I'm trying to do, is learn as we go forward. So I don't have the answer whether that is something that needs to be done or doesn't. I know they identified money in the budget that was able to be repurposed. I know that the resiliency position that has been created and filled, and I actually did meet with her last week, that came from an anonymous donor who gave 3 years of donations at an 80, 60, 40% until we get fully funded ourselves. So we had to match it with certain monies. So that was actually donated by an anonymous donor. So it put us, that we were able to, and that position was filled very quickly. So obviously we do know there is a need for that. That's something that if you spoke with the engineer department, they're overwhelmed. Again, goes back to the days of, when we did attritions and we cut the departments down to be a lean, mean fighting machine as a city. We've created that. But, on the flip side of that is when we need to start recognizing other things that are currently happening with the resiliency in the coastal. And, the debate of, how global warming's happening or is not happening, or how the high tides, the 50-year flooding and all those are things that can be debated no matter where we stand scientifically. That's not my thing. My thing, I'm a restaurant owner. I know how to make a chicken palm sub, but I'm willing to listen and learn the answers from people. I spoke with, like I said, I didn't have a long conversation with the new director. Her name's Arena. And, she gave me some insight into some things. And again, it was very general, but for my ward, I'm greatly affected with the erosion down in O'Bear Park. And so that's kind of one of the things that she's going to help identify is what's the best way. Is it the tidal waters that are creating it? Is it been past infrastructure along the river that push the waters in a certain way to create this, but there's a real erosion issue within the last 5 years. And we can see the sign that sits there that once had a good 8 feet of property in front of it and now is basically into the water. So those are things that she's going to help identify. Obviously, to be able to fill the position a week after it being posted, there was definitely a thought of this well prior. We've been fortunate that a gentleman came forward with some funding for it. How it looks after 3 years, I don't know. So again, any of these positions can always be debated whether we need it or not. Right now, I feel there is a need for it. Exactly what the position looks like today may change in a few weeks, in a few months. I think it will help coordinate. We didn't have a grant director several years back. And, God bless the grant director who's been writing all these grants and getting a lot of money for us. I mean, her position's worth its weight in gold right now. She's, whether they were easily to get or not easy to get, but she's willing to put the time into it. She's willing to work with all the department heads to acquire these grants. I mean, we've gotten a ton of money through that. So, I don't think there's ever been a city council meeting that we don't sit on that there's 3 or 4 grants in front of us that we're able to accept. So there are positions that have been created in the past that would debate it, whether they were really worth it or not. So I hope that answers your question. Maybe it was a little too wordy for you. That's unfortunate. I think that's part of the gift of the Irish in me is that I have the gift of gab. And I think George and I kind of discussed that a few weeks back.
Yeah. We all understand thick as a neck and a few more things too, yeah. But when you get into some of the issues that we're facing right now, I guess the next question is, where do we go from here? We have an erosion problem at O'Bear Park. There was a mention in one of the recent city council meetings of needing to do something about the pumping station so that it can continue to pump underwater or be protected from high water. Because the last thing we need is having all the sewage back up in town. So there are some real issues along that line. And I guess the long-term concern is if you look at what Beverly really needs in the long term, that's still an open question. And we've got a Plan Beverly group that's working on what the city needs to do. And one of the issues keeps coming up is how much emphasis do we put on TOD, this transportation-oriented development? Um, Ward 1 is pretty close to the railroad station, so you're catching some of the influence of the building on Rantoul Street. Do we want to do that all over town? What are your thoughts on how?
So, interestingly enough, it is. It's a loaded question, and listen, we as New Englanders have a hard time with change. That's a fact for all of us. The Cumming Center came in, people fought that in Ward 1. Now you just moved up to the city, and they didn't know how it was going to affect Stop and Shop. It was going to affect the smaller markets, and in essence, it probably did. But it created a need for the area. Now, in regards to the building on Rantoul Street, the past buildings that were there, were dilapidated. And so we have, there may not always be the prettiest looking buildings that are there, but they're better than what was existing. They have created a tax revenue for us with new growth. I know there has been discussion for the last several years now with the bowler mat, which would directly affect Ward 1, especially with the traffic flow. And that's, I know, another question is, they talk about the transportation-oriented development, and the fact is, how do we really measure that, what's being used, especially now with the pandemic, how are we really measuring people telecommuting? I know that the Boston real estate market's starting to decrease because people are moving out of Boston because they don't have to be there to commute. They can do it from their homes, and so they're moving up to this area, which was kind of what that idea of the transportation development around the train stations occurred. Now it's through the Plan Beverly, they showed places up in North Beverly. The North Beverly train station was one instance. More directly to my ward, we're looking at the bowler mat, and I don't know what's going with that. I know the Plan Beverly has some instances and examples of what they're looking for. Those ancillary roads between National Grid, whether they'll ever sell. That property is contaminated. They take care of that, whether Monaghan's chooses to develop their property. I don't have those answers. Obviously that's something that I will keep an eye on. I know that's a concern amongst the people in Ward 1 especially. I do get phone calls from time to time. What have you heard? What's going on? Rumor has it it's sold to Wendover. Rumor has that it's sold to another developer. Those are a lot of rumors. Nothing's happened with that right now. When does enough become enough? You figure the supply and demand will drive rents down. That obviously hasn't happened in Beverly. Beverly is a very desirable city to live in. Listen, we have 5 train stations, 4 exits off of 128. We have a harbor management authority, an airport. We're a unique city. It's a very desirable place to live. So even though they're continually building these, apartment buildings, it still seems that there's a need for more housing, and I don't know what the real answer is, because you're still looking at rents at being $2,500, $3,200 in these newer units. So it's interesting where the balance happens. When does enough become enough? One thing I got to applaud our planning department, especially Darlene Wynn, who's the new director, is that she's working much more closely with the harbor management, and especially on the waterfront, because those are kind of areas that were identified as developing. We look over at Ward 2 and over the old Ventron site, and they have that brand new apartment development that just went up. And, there's a walkway in front of it. So there's some good that's come out of it. I talked to many people who come into the restaurant and feel completely opposite, that there's been way too much developing going on. But, of course, my question to them is, does it look better than what was existing there? The traffic, 1A has been done over. The state did that whole route over, and they've done the traffic signals, and they've made them a little more efficient. I know they're working on down by the bridge area where they're putting in new signals there. They're reconfiguring a little bit of that construction area. Henry's Market, the same thing there. There's 3 projects going on throughout the city in different parts of the city that are all related. So they're trying to make it more efficient for the traveling. But, the pandemic's changing a lot of the things right now. They really get true, how do we get a real true traffic flow now where traffic isn't the same as it was pre-COVID?
Todd, I've asked, one time Mayor Scanlon was on the show, and I said to the mayor, Beverly is a place that people drive through to go from Salem to Gloucester and Rockport. and yet Beverly has a lot of history, including being the birthplace of the American Navy. I have suggested to every mayor since Peter Fortunato that we build a replica of the ship Hannah on Glover's Wharf, and we sail it from Glover's Wharf to Marblehead, where the ship was actually built, and have a nice little discussion about how the Navy was built and why it was the way it was, and having a little argument between Beverly and Marblehead. That would bring to Beverly more tourists. It would probably bring some motels or hotels. You've seen the big hotel that they just built in Salem. That would bring in a lot more tax money, would help the restaurants. And by the way, people should know that your restaurant is Cafe Salerno, so that a little publicity never hurts. You've mentioned the restaurant. But what do you think of that project, and why can't any mayor do anything about it?
So, full disclosure, I'm a big history buff. So I'm always going to be, whenever you talk history, my ears perk up. I love history. I really do. And I have heard you say this many years now. I've heard it discussed many. I mean, obviously they have the friendship over in Salem, which is, I believe, that was done private donations, if I'm not mistaken. I'm sure the national, the interior, however, I'm losing words for who's maintaining it right now.
National Park Service.
Thank you so much. I know it's maritime. So I know they're maintaining it right now, and we know that obviously it's been pulled out of, put on dry dock. It's been rehabilitated. So really, I guess it's identifying funding, first of all, and the prioritizing of it. Right now, obviously, the waterfront is kind of debatable, especially down in Ward 2 with the coming of the restaurant. So the mission on the bay or whatever the project, Marty Bloom is putting forward, is going to be a restaurant with, it's mandated that it has to have access to bathrooms and some sort of an area where people can gather. Now, whether that's the space that we identify as something like this, I don't know. I mean, obviously it's dollars and cents, the easiest answer.
There's got to be grants for that from the federal government, but I don't know whether anybody's approached Seth Moulton. I certainly did and got no response.
Well, then that's something now, after I get off, it's something I would always discuss with Catherine Barrett, who is our grant writer. She's great at identifying grants. She really is. And whether it's on the mayor's radar or not, I'm sure if you came up to the mayor and said, hey, I've identified X million dollars to build this Hannah replica, and what do you think? I think you would definitely go forward to look. And I shouldn't be putting words in his mouth, but I'm sure it'd be something that would be considered. I think it just really comes to dollars and cents and who would, take control of it, who would, maintain it. I think it's, a bigger project to consider. Obviously we have something in our backyard to say, hey, let's go over to Salem, and how did they do it? I know Jim Fox was very instrumental in helping to raise funds for that. His family actually lives in Beverly, but he was very instrumental with the in getting that replica built. So, do we, someone out there, and Ellie, maybe you'd be the person for that. I know you've, mentioned it several times. And again, I've heard it many times. I, being a history buff, would love to see something like that. How do we approach it? It's a conversation that maybe we should, have it as this waterfront's being developed. I mean, here's maybe an opportunity to bring it back up and say, hey, listen, this is being privately funded. We're trying to reconfigure it. We have a harbor management. Maybe I sit on that as a city councilor. Maybe that's an opportunity for me to bring it to Paul Earl and see what he says.
To help you on it anyhow.
And I would, like I said, and then this is, not because we're interviewing right now, but truly I will definitely, one thing I always try to pride myself is if I say I'm going to do it, I'm doing it. Now, whether I'm successful is a different thing. And I always say is all I can do is do the best is get you the answers and do the research for you. Whether I come back with the answer you're looking for, that's a different story. But I'm willing to do the work for that. So like I said, I'll call Catherine Barrett. I'll talk with Paul Earl on the harbor management. And eventually, once I do my homework and get the ducks in a row, then it's something that maybe we can sit down with the mayor and have a discussion about.
All right. George, you got something?
Oh, sure. One of my pet projects is looking at the housing availability and affordability. And we get caught in this game of, well, we got 12% affordable housing. And well, yeah. And you look at the numbers that go along with that, and what they mean by affordable is some percentage of the median income. And the median income for the city is something on the order of 75,000. So there's a lot of people who can't meet the threshold for the quote affordable housing. And I think what we need to also start to think about is housing that people can afford. And I think when we had our one-on-one discussion a while back, you mentioned that you started out with a duplex. You and your brother, I think.
Still there.
Still there. And this duplexes and triple deckers are a way to develop personal wealth, because you can get some help covering the mortgage by renting the property out. And this has been a technique that's been used for years. And all of a sudden, we don't have the zoning to cover that kind of stuff. And we had a discussion a week or so ago with Kathleen Feldman, one of your associates on the city council. And she was mentioning in the Raymond Farms area, people are now starting to take these bungalows, ranches, and put a second floor on it, just because what are you going to do with the parents? And trying to downsize gets to be terribly expensive, because you sell your house and you want to buy something smaller, it costs you just as much as what you sold it for. So there's getting to be a lot of activity going on how do we adjust the housing to match the people that are here.
So it's funny you say that, because you're right. We had a discussion. You were speaking of your granddaughter, I believe it was your granddaughter, and my daughter's 23, graduated college. She's got a master's. She's working towards teaching now. But you look at the affordable to buy a place in Beverly, and once upon a time, Ryleside. I just had this discussion with my wife yesterday. Ryleside was the affordable place to move into the city. You get a starter home. They're going for $450,000 right now. When I came and bought my house with my brother and our wives, it was $139,000 for a duplex, split the mortgage. And then speaking to the whole in-law apartments, it's how I identify what you're saying is, and I know Salem's having issues with that, but it's something that I brought this up to the prior planning department director, Aaron Clausen, was, listen, I have in-laws that are in their mid-70s who need to get rid of their home, and we need to find a place to move them in. I think it's kind of what we're seeing is a lot of building where in-law apartments are being built, or like you said, additions, because we're going back to when I grew up in Everett, triple deckers. First floor was me, the second floor was my aunt and uncle, third floor was the grandparents. I mean, that's just how I grew up in Everett. But I think right now it's like we're kind of going back to that situation, and the zoning laws. I haven't heard anything yet that have stopped people in Beverly from putting these in-law apartments. I know there's, zoning, go in front of the ZBA, and maybe I need to learn a little bit more about this. It hasn't been brought to my attention on a personal level, where someone's called me and said, hey, listen, I'm having a problem with getting an in-law apartment, or I'm trying to put an addition to move my parents in. I've recognized that I've seen it, so I'm aware that it is happening. And, I equate it to, how I grew up living, where, 3 families lived in one house, and, it was helped to pay the mortgage too.
Well, I think the trick of the game is, I've explored this with the building inspector. If you have one entrance to the house, it's a single family house, no matter how many generations are living there.
Mm-hmm.
And that allows you to put an in-law apartment up on the 3rd floor, or build a 3rd floor to put an in-law apartment in. But on the other half of the game of trying to do it as a duplex or the kind of triple decker you were describing, that's a different ballgame. And that's, I think, where the zoning gets a little touchy. But the other thing is, we've had an awful lot of fun here for a half an hour, and our time is about running out. And would you like to close up the discussion with your final thoughts, and we'll turn it over to Elliot to do the final touch.
First, I just want to thank the two of you for having me here. I know there's a lot more we could discuss, and George, I've already made that invitation to you that anytime you and I can sit down for a cup of coffee, I would love to. Elliot, and I'm sincere about, exploring that opportunity to see if this is something that we could do with the Hannah replica down on Glover's Wharf. I mean, I told you I'm a history buff. In regards to any issues within the city, one thing I've always made it abundantly clear since I've taken office in January is that I'm easily approachable. I'm at the restaurant. I'm working the front. It's not like I'm hiding in the back. There's not a bunch of people in front of us. You're either going to get me or my brother Michael. My phone number's out there. So I always want people to know that I'm easily to approach. Whether you live in my ward or if you're just in the city, listen, we're all part of Beverly. I believe we all should help each other. That's truly how I feel. One of the reasons why I got into the politics was to provide constituent services. And listen, I'm in the hospitality industry. That's what I do for a living. But I do want to thank you for inviting me to the show today.
Well, it was a pleasure having you, Todd. And I have to tell you, there's a lot more questions that I have that we didn't get to. Both of us have the problem of the gift to gab, and we can make a short story long. And
yes.
But
Elliot, we can have an offline conversation anytime. Obviously, George has my cell phone number. You can get it on the city website too.
But we definitely appreciate you coming on. This was good for people to see, and our job is to make this show important to the people of the city of Beverly. You've helped that. Thank you very much. And to everybody watching, thank you for watching, and we hope it was educational for you, and we will see you at the next show. Good night.